Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Aidan Mundy, and go through a few bits of housekeeping because I appreciate there's some new faces. No fire drills planned tonight, so if you hear the alarm, please do follow us swiftly out the exits. The agenda will be taken as in order. We'll have a short break after the last item relating to enforcement before we go into a private session for training, and that will be around 8:30. And those in the room, please do come to the front and take water in public gallery as well. It does tend to get hot in here, and I'm just going to outline the process for everyone, for those speaking and online, just for clarity. So we take each item, will follow the same process. So an officer will present an application and reference the modification sheet. In terms of speakers, we'll have objectors first, then ward councillors, then the applicant or agent, then officers will respond, making reference to the answers and anything, any technical points. And then we'll take 3 questions at a time from the committee. Sort of new for this committee, it'll be the first time where the committee members will be able to follow up on with actual points to those who spoke. So that will be channeled through myself, and it'll just be clear these are for factual follow-ups rather than an extension of the speaker's time. And then we'll move on to comments and general observations. We may need to debate certain things if we need to talk about conditions, and then we'll move to a vote on the recommendation, asking those to vote, voting against, not voting, and voting for in that order. I've had apologies from Councillor Bim, and Councillor Caroline Charles is very grateful to sub in, and Councillor Hicks as well, with Councillor Galea sub in too. So I've got is there any declarations of interest before I move on to the minutes of the last meeting? Brilliant, thank you very much. So minutes of the last meeting, can I have a seconder that they're a true and accurate account? Thank you very much. So we'd like to move on to our first item of business. So that's 57 Kenilworth Avenue, Wimbledon. It's a basement, and it's Dave who's going to lead on that. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This application has been brought before committee due to the number of objections that have been received. The application site comprises a 2-storey semi-detached dwelling, which is located on the south side of Kenilworth Avenue in Wimbledon. The site is not located in the conservation area, and there are no trees subject to TPOs. Here's some photographs. So this is the existing patio at the rear. Again, this is the patio at the rear, showing the side boundary fence with number 55. This is a photograph from the rear garden showing the existing raised patio. This is the patio of number 55, which is also a raised patio. This is the raised patio of number 59, and that's a photo of the rear of the existing property. And again, that's number 55. As you can see, there's a raised patio there with a couple steps down from the internal ground floor. That's the front of the existing house. This is a section drawing showing the existing house. Again, it's showing the existing levels of the rear and the front of the house, and that's an existing drawing of the rear elevation. The proposal is to excavate a new basement and insert front and rear light wells. The rear wall of the basement would extend 4.3 meters beyond the existing ground floor rear building line, so it will extend basically the same distance as the existing rear patio. Then there'll be a light well which will extend another 2 meters. The front light well would extend 1 meter beyond the existing front bay window. To accommodate the basement accommodation, the rear patio would be raised by approximately 30 centimeters. All right, so that's the proposed rear elevation. That's the proposed front elevation. Proposed basement. That's the proposed first floor plan. It's not changing. Proposed basement plan. That's the section drawing of the rear elevation. So that's showing the level of excavation at the rear. And this is a level, so section drawing. As you can see, there's now 1 step. To put in the context, there's basically 1 step down to the patio now from the internal ground floor, whereas previously it was 2 steps. So it's been raised the equivalent of 2 steps, or approximately 30 centimeters. Reasons for objections are set out in page 12 and 13 of the agenda. In terms of planning considerations, the principle of a basement is acceptable. The basement won't exceed 50% of the front, side or rear gardens. In terms of visual amenity, it should be noted that the property is not located in a conservation area, and the proposed light well is discreetly located, featuring a metal grille, which is set back from the street and flush with ground level. It should also be noted that number 39 was granted permission for a basement excavation front light well. The rear element would only result in a small increase in the patio level, so it would have a limited impact on the appearance of the rear of the property. In terms of residential amenity, the bulk of the proposal is subterranean, so there will be little visual impact. And it's considered that the increase of the patio height would be quite modest, so there should be limited impacts on privacy. In terms of flood risk and the basement construction itself, the site is situated in flood zone 1, so it's at low risk of flooding. The applicant has also submitted a basement impact assessment and construction method statement. The council's flood risk engineer and the construction engineer have assessed the proposal and satisfied with the details which have been submitted, subject to suitable conditions. It is therefore recommended that the application is approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll take speakers now. So we have Kate and Simon Marsh to speak. So what we'll have is we'll have the traffic light indicator. Are you going to plan to speak collectively for 6 minutes? So we'll chop and change or individually? Yeah, cool. So we'll set it at 6 minutes total then. And then the applicant will have 6 minutes as well. You're free to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I know we gave late notice. I'm speaking on behalf of all of the neighbours that have submitted objections. We've got various concerns that we set out in those objections. It's not clear that all of those objections and concerns have been addressed. However, as we have very limited time, I'm going to focus on 3 particular points that are of significant concern. The first of these concerns, the basement impact assessment. This is clearly an important document. You will know more about this than I. Sufficiently important that the committee proposed withdrawing this application in March 2020 because no basement impact assessment had been submitted. One was submitted in May 2020. This, for reasons I'm not clear, was revised on the 8th of September 2022. It's this latter report with which I still have some concerns. The first of these concerns is that it's not clear from that report that it's correctly identified the property that it's reporting on. On page 11 of 63 of that report is outlined in red the property on which the report is based. Outlined in red is number 61 Kenilworth Avenue, not number 57. The second source for concern that I've got is with respect to the technical drawings that that report is based on. On page 2 of 63, it refers to the drawings that were considered in drafting that report. Those drawings are dated September 2019. All of those drawings have been revised subsequently in submissions made to the Planning Committee in 2021. The third concern that I have is with respect to the description of the property on page 2 of 63, where it's described as a 2-story end of terrace. It is in fact a 3-story semi-detached property. So my concerns are that this is not necessarily the correct property or correctly described or understood in terms of basement impact assessment, and clearly that's a very important document. The second point I'd like to make is with respect to the construction methods statement. In particular regard, number 57 has outside of it a passing place. That passing place is outside of 5 foot properties, numbers 53, 55, 57 and 59. Total length of that passing space is 100 feet. Number 57, passing space is 25 feet, and that adjoins 25 feet outside number 59. In order for the skip to be put outside that property, it's going to take up 13 feet, which leaves no room at all for deliveries. It also means that the passing space will be halved in length the entire duration of the excavation. That doesn't seem to be particularly helpful, and it doesn't seem to have been highlighted and as a problem in the construction method statement. There are various other issues with the construction method statement, and I'll ask Kate to comment on these in a moment. Third point that I'd make, and I will make this very briefly, is if the committee is minded to grant this planning permission, all of the neighbours have very significant concerns that the applicants will seek subsequent to this to subdivide the property and make it into several very sizable flats. And that would result in a very significant problem in the longer term in parking spaces. So if the committee is minded to grant this planning permission, we would seek to have a covenant attached to it that there will be no subsequent subdivision of the property. There are also other concerns on the construction side of it, and I'll let Kate speak to those.
So the main concern that I wish to speak to about now is the noise. The build's going to take about 18 months, and a basement this size is going to require substantial and sustained excavation with attendant noise and dirt in the surrounding vicinity. We've asked for conditions to reduce noise impact will be of such a level as to prohibit working from home. These conditions are that the working would be Monday to Friday, 8 till 4, and there would be no weekend working. And we would also ask that the noise survey that's required, the background noise survey, is made public. These conditions are especially important to us because we have our adult son living at home with us who has serious mental illness. He's unable to live independently at the moment, and it will have a real big impact on his mental health. I also have my mother with dementia coming to live with us shortly, and again, it's going to have a significant impact for her as well. They have nowhere else that they can live. We've talked about the parking spaces. The only other thing is the flooding risk. I know it's in a low risk flooding area, but there has been flooding in the garden of 59, which the council have come out and seen and have advised that it's likely due to basement builds further up the street. You do have records of that.
Thank you very much. Now, can I hear from the agent? Is it Adrian, who will be speaking for 6 minutes?
Right, thanks very much for the time to speak on this.
We have listened to the concerns and we have tried to address this as much as we can. This application has taken over 2 years to get to this point. So our client has been very patient on this. We had various change of officers. Hence, there is some drawings prepared back in 2019, which have not changed through that duration, but that's why they're dated that far apart. There were some revised plans which were submitted when the new officer was on board, but that didn't change the layout, the structure in any form. In terms of the basement impact assessment, I'll have a look at the report, but this is a full basement impact assessment with boreholes specifically on site to assess the condition of the soil, which will then, as it's been conditioned in the planning approval or recommendation, is to have a further assessment later on pre-commencement, and there are various other conditions to that effect, including parking. So a logistics plan about how the operation of this will take place during the build. So the actual basement impact assessment is site specific and it addresses the actual conditions on site. There hasn't been any major issues found during those boreholes and lab tests of the ground. In terms of duration of the build, the actual basement structure would only take between 4 to 5 months to create the shell, and the rest of the works is internal fit out, as you'd have any other renovation in the street. As rightly pointed out, there are other basements in the street that have been approved previously. Visually, the basement will not affect any amenity to surrounding. There is a natural gradient to the site, and in terms of excavation, we're not expecting to excavate very much deeper. There's about 1.5 meters or meter below the ground of the ground floor. In terms of potential future conversion to flats, there is no interest to do that. The client wants to build a family home that they can grow in for the future. And if there was a planning application made in the future for flat conversion, they'll go through the whole process again for full planning, where all the neighbours will have the opportunity to object. But there is absolutely no interest to do that. The client's waited about 2 years to get to this stage. They want to build a family home to address the family spatial needs, really, going forward. APT renovation, ask the agents. We are one of the leading Southwest London basement specialists. We carry out about 7 basements a year within Southwest London. So we have track record and knowledge of how to do this basement without causing too much issues to any of the neighbours. And we will, of course, deal with any of the technical issues through the next steps, which will be party wall agreeing with the surrounding neighbours. Full engineering will be prepared. Building control officers will be on site to assess the works, as well as any potential impact to the neighbouring structures. There will be on-site tracking mechanism to check if there is any movement to the ground, and these will be taken care of through the next part, which will be party wall and building control and the whole structural engineering. There are a number of pre-commencement conditions to enforce this process, pretty much to kind of address most of these points that were raised, both parking, logistics, as well as further investigations on the ground going forward. Flood risk zone 1, there hasn't been, through the basement impact assessment, there hasn't been any red flags effectively on site based on the site conditions. So we don't see any issues going forward. There will be a full delta membrane system with pumps that will basically discharge any water built in the cavities back to the same water course as the drainage system that is on site. So we don't see any issues going forward technically. Now I understand the basements can be
annoying, especially to neighbours, because we understand, construction involves a bit of time and a bit of noise, but that happens through renovation and everything else. In terms of noise, there isn't going to be any more noise than a standard renovation or extension. All the ground digging will be done by hand and will be done systematically based on sequence. So you wouldn't dig the whole basement at once, you'll do it at 1 meter sections and then underpin in the same. There is no machinery to cause any serious noise. It will just be done by hand throughout. Once the basement excavation is done, the skip on the road will be taken away, and all the waste and all the skips will be positioned on the front drive effectively. So there will not be any issues in terms of that parking scenario. So we've spent about 2 years discussing with various planning officers this. They've gone and checked with the flood risk engineer at the council, the structural engineer.
Time. Thank you very much for that very helpful feedback. I'm going to ask David now if you wouldn't mind coming back on some of those points. I'll be particularly interested to hear any reflections on Mr. Marsh's point about documentation accuracy and how that has affected your recommendation that you're presenting to us today.
In terms of those points, I mean, the only thing I can reiterate is that the structural and flood engineers have carried out a full assessment of that of the scheme. So myself, I can't add anything further, but all I can just reassure you is that that our own experts on flood risk and basement impact structural issues have fully assessed it. And one of the reasons why it has taken a long time to get to committee was because the original information which was submitted wasn't sufficient for us to carry the scheme forwards. And the reports which was submitted in September, basement impact assessment, was considered acceptable. So that was in response to the deficiencies of the original application. Can I just add a couple points regarding noise? We've got a condition restricting hours of construction. So no construction on Sundays, Saturday afternoons, or on bank holidays. And just in terms of parking, the council's highways officer has also assessed it and considers it acceptable, but has asked for a condition requiring further details on loading and unloading arrangements to reduce any impact during construction. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. So I'm going to open this up now to the committee and colleagues. Does anyone have any questions they want to follow up at all? It's got 2 hands, 3. So good, Jill, Mike, and then Caroline. Jill.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the officers for very carefully preparing the documents and making it as crystal clear as possible for people like me to understand. Much appreciated. And I think it's helpful to remember that, you know, these designers that make these basements are professional people, so I trust that they know what they're doing. So there are 2 mini little objections which I sort of picked up on, and I don't know whether they've been addressed or not. One was the potential impact on street tree, I think there must be 1 tree that they're worried about, and impact on flora and fauna. Not entirely sure whether they mean there's going to be a loss of green as a result of this development. I don't think so, but maybe we could just elaborate on this tree.
It's a fair point. Mike?
It's sort of 2 questions, really. One to the officers and then one actually to the applicant. My first question to the officers, I understand when you sort of said with regard to working hours, no work on Saturday afternoon, Sundays and bank holidays. I'm of a mind to agree with the residents that they've been reasonable in asking to keep the working hours to Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Is that a condition we can oppose, or at the very least make sure no weekend working at all if possible? My second question to the applicant actually is, what would these working hours, how would they affect deliveries and such? If he's able to answer that, I would appreciate, but thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for asking our first ever applicant question. We'll bring that back after we've heard from the officer. Caroline?
Yes, I've just got a question for the applicant. I just wanted to know, is the basement going to be a self-contained flat with a separate electric supply to the main house?
Two good questions for our applicant. So if I just summarize, so I think these are going to be for David first. So we've got impact on the street tree and the fauna and flora report. I assume that's about the extension of the space at the back for the basement, and also the conditionality on extension of working hours, and then we'll address the questions to the agent afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, there is a street tree located outside the front. I mean, it's considered that the impact there would be an acceptable impact. The basement is set back 2.85 meters from the front boundary. I don't know off the top of my head how much further away the tree is, but given it's been built more or less under the existing basement, under the existing house with only a small encroachment to the front, I wouldn't consider the impact on this tree to be not acceptable. In terms of fauna and flora, the basement's been built under the existing patio. Patio's been raised. I think one objection was concerned about the lack of not being able to plant any new sort of trees or plants with the basement being located there. Again, I consider the impact to be acceptable. It's under the existing patio, and there is quite a significant amount of garden space which is being retained. In terms of working hours, I'm inclined to agree. If it's if you're really concerned about the impact of noise and want the hours restricted to Monday to Friday only, and we can further restrict those hours to those days. Yeah.
Thank you. And to our applicant and or agent, so Mike's question about how we'll further restricting, so what we're ultimately talking about here is taking off that Saturday morning. How will that impact your delivery schedule and this disruption, the ability to turn this around? And to Caroline's question about, is that a self-contained basement, as in separate energy supply, separate power box? If you can elaborate on that, it'd be great.
Okay. Reducing 1 hour per day would impact the delivery. We'll probably add another month to the build. Working on weekends, as it's restricted to 1 p.m. Usually that helps us basically shorten the construction time that it takes to dig out the basement. It's fine. We can restrict just working on weekdays, but again, that does increase a little bit. I mean, every hour counts to get this done, and usually we like to get the structural, the shell of the basement done as quickly as possible, so that the major waste removal is kind of taken care of, and then it's just internal works. But we're happy to accept Saturday, Sunday, no work for the initial build of the shell, and then when we're inside, then I guess that's just as a typical renovation everywhere else. In terms of using the basement as a separate flat, that's not the intention at all. It'll be one air source heat pump or feeding the entire house, as well as using the electricity from the house. It's just an extension to the existing property. In terms of you losing any green space or potential for green space, as David rightly noted, this is below the existing terrace, and we made the decision to slightly raise the terrace just to make those levels work better for the family, because at the moment,
Yeah.
directly from the extension, you've got 2 steps down. So there's no intention to use the basement
Thank
as a
you.
separate.
Cool. No, thank you for that, and add in a bit more. Colleagues, so is there any further questions? Just one from Joe.
So maybe as a compromise, the first part of the build, which is getting rid of the earth, if we were to potentially have the full working hours plus a Saturday morning just to get the nasty bit out of the way, and then when it becomes the more just the internal work, then restrict the working hours to weekdays and not Saturdays. That might be an unusual request, but it might help, because what we don't want to do is extend this bill beyond what it should be. And my last comment, if I may, on this little tree or big tree, I don't know what tree it is, how close is it going to be to the entrance of where they're working? And can it be protected against any kind of damage from skips and lorries in any way, shape or form?
Thank you. So 2 brief questions there. So, you know, is it in our power to do that split time zone in terms of deliveries, etc.? And to Joe's point about protections for that tree, I think it'll be helpful if there was even a Google map or something like that, just to understand what the risk is of that actually happening.
Yes, yeah, it is possible to put that condition. Restricting hours first of all during the excavation, and then restricting it further during the actual construction itself. In terms of the street tree, we could add a condition requiring the submission of an arboricultural implication assessment. I didn't, first of all, I didn't think it was necessary, but if you're concerned about the impact of the tree, then just to be on the safe side, we can always have that condition. Yeah, it's basically, I don't know exactly, it's at the front on the street, and I think it's just to the sides. If you look at it from the front, it's just to the side, maybe more on the boundary with number 55, I think.
Fantastic.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there it is. You can see it's just out of sight there. So
let's make sure that skips and big lorries backing in and out don't take chunks out of it. That's all I'm asking. Thank
I think you can also see that the actual trunk is quite far away from the actual front boundary edge as well. So there's a bit of distance there as well. So it's probably good 4 meters or so, 3.5 meters away.
Well, our next item is about tree preservation, so I think that condition would fall in quite nicely. So, okay, over to comments committee. Any further comments wish to add? Suggestions for taking next steps on those conditions, Mike? And then Kayla.
Yeah, I'm inclined to back either Jill's proposal or something on stopping weekend working. I think it's trying to find the right balance between making sure residents aren't being disturbed, but also getting the build done and out of the way as quickly as possible. So I think as long as we lock in a condition on working hours more than we currently have, but lock it in firmly, and taking the word that the property is meant to be used as a family home and there is no plan for dividing it, I'm inclined to grant permission currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten, and then Simon.
I would be a bit weary of changing the conditions that the neighbors have asked for, because they specifically seem to, want, so during excavation, I think is the worst time. So I think I'd be uncomfortable with changing that depending on what they're working on. I would support, obviously, completely having those working hours for the whole term, I guess, even if it's elongating the time. And then the only other thing I'd say is if we could make sure that the pavement is not obstructed by the tree protection, because obviously we've got people who need to pass as well. Thank you, that's it.
Simon and
Thank you. I'm happy to pass this with some of the changes that have been proposed, but I do think if we're going to, and there are particular reasons which have been explained to us by the neighbours why we would reduce the hours. But I do think if we're going to, in general, talk about reducing the hours of building, we need to have a kind of discussion about that in general rather than deal with it on a sort of case by case basis. Although in this case, there are clearly a specific set of reasons for doing it, but I'm fine with agreeing with this proposal.
thank you, Martin.
I think in terms of working hours, I would restrict weekend working. I think I'm satisfied in terms of 8 to 6 because I think that is the standard working day, and I would be opposed to reducing that to 4 o'clock. I think it's generally been the case across developments over Merton, certainly except the points in terms of weekends. But I would not be supportive of supporting working hours during the weekday. I think 6 o'clock is a reasonable time.
Fantastic. So can I just to clarify, so we've had a few different suggestions. So in terms of working hours, it's Martin, your point was keep them at 8 till 6?
8 till 6, Monday to Friday, and obviously weekend working.
No weekend working. Is that acceptable? Yeah. Jill?
It's not ideal, but it's a swings and roundabouts. We either have long working hours and a shorter time or vice versa. But if the general consensus is to stick to the normal working hours without Saturdays, then I'm happy for that to go ahead.
No, thank you. I mean, I think you're exactly right, and the applicant has articulated it, and the neighbours as well. And I think I would hope that the neighbours know what they were suggesting or proposing, and as a result that would lengthen any build because ultimately dirt still needs to be removed. Okay, so moving now to the actual vote itself then. So it's taking, oh sorry, it's my laptop. Taking a vote on the amended condition. Can I have those voting against?
Chairman.
Not voting?
Non-chairman.
Voting in favour?
Nine, Chairman.
Fantastic. So that is approved with the added condition of the tweak in hours. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to come this evening. So we're going to move on to our next item. We have Rose speaking. So it's 50 Ridgeway Place. It's a tree preservation order.
Images of. No. Yeah. No,
Over to you. John, over to you. Apologies, Rose is not, John, you'll be stepping in for Rose instead.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Members of the Planning Committee, this is a proposed tree preservation order to protect an ash tree outside the front of number 50 Ridgeway Place. If I could just ask members to, if I could just draw your attention to the location plan on the screen before you. T1 is marked, that's the ash tree, a very prominent location in the street scene. And officers are recommending that members do confirm the proposed tree preservation order without modification, but we do need you to consider an objection before you do that. So if I could just take members through the report, on page 37, the planning history is set out, and that has convinced officers that there is reasonable threat to the tree, the future of the tree. We've had a section 211 notice put to us for works to trees in the conservation area, a number on this site, all of which were essentially acceptable and have been allowed, apart from this ash tree. The proposal was to remove that, and we didn't agree. We thought that it was worthy of protection, so we served the tree preservation order. That is the correct procedure. If we receive a 211 notice and we have concerns, then we should serve the order to immediately protect the tree. We have also, just to reinforce that point, we have got development proposals around the building on the property. Now, actually, in that application, the tree has been shown for retention, but officers feel it's important to make our position very clear and for there not to be any confusion between the section 211 notice and the development proposals and what we expect in terms of the future of this ash tree. So section 3 of the report takes members through the legislative background that enables us to serve tree preservation orders. Section 4, starting on page 38, running into page 39, sets out a challenge that's been made by a arboriculturalist representing the landowner. And there are some different grounds for objection. I think probably the clearest one is that the tree is exhibiting early symptoms of ash dieback disease, and I will come back to that. But the developer also feels that there's an arboriculturalist looking after the site. It has been proposed for retention in the latest plans. The conservation area does offer some protection anyway, and that there are other factors other than the development of a site that need to justify a tree preservation order. In response, the council's tree officer has examined the situation and has advised that the ash tree, whilst it may have early signs of disease, that is in the very early stages, and that there could be 5 to 10 years of the future of this tree. That's not a reason for its removal right now. And if I could just come on to that point, actually. So that's a photograph of the tree as it is now. And you'll see it's obviously a significant feature in the street scene. And further down the street, there's not really anything of that significance. But also the officer has taken this photograph from under the canopy, which shows it's still in good health, actually. It's not receded back too far. That's pretty consistent with how it's been in the past. We've looked at images in the past. We can't see any notable decline. So we don't think that the early stages of what is a very common disease should be justification to remove the tree now. We also think that the tree preservation order makes the situation absolutely clear and makes sure that the tree is afforded the ultimate protection. It removes any element of doubt when development proposals, if and when they come forward for the site, which has already happened. And yes, okay, it's not just about development proposals, but we think, looking at that tree, particularly that shot, that it is well worthy of keeping. So for those reasons, members, we are recommending that the order be confirmed without modification.
Thank you very much, John. Open the floor to questions. I've got a question as well, but we've got Ed, Dan, and then myself.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I know the property and I know the tree. No surprise. I mean, it's a lovely plot there to develop, which is something separate. This tree, what can be done apart from the preservation order? Is there anything that can be done to stop this disease spreading any further? Because it does look, well, I agree with everything John said. I mean, it's a fine tree. it's probably one of the best ones in the street, and it stands out as needing protecting. But I'm just wondering, if we're putting a preservation order on it, what can be done to try and, I mean, that tree is valuable. We can't put another one in. What can be done to sort of stop this disease in its tracks? Are there any expert knowledge of this? That's fine.
Good question, Dan.
Thanks. I also wanted to ask about the ash dieback disease, and just if you could fill me in a bit more about how it works, and also how does it spread? Does the fact that this tree have it means trees within the vicinity are more likely to contract it as well?
Thank you. And my question would be about kind of adding those two together. What additional conditions or considerations does the site owner need to take into account in terms of because of this? So just recapping, obviously, Ed's point about what can be done to preserve and help the tree fight back. Dan's point about the condition of ash dieback itself and probably any data we have in the borough. And then my point about what are we asking the applicant to do as a result of those two things to support the tree.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and all really good questions, and we've been talking about that in the office. It's very difficult in terms of stopping this disease. What is likely to happen is the following elements will be displayed in due course. So there will be spots on the leaves, wilted leaves, branches losing leaves and dying back, and dark patches, lesions being formed on the branches or the trunk. That is really difficult to stop because even mud and leaves in the vicinity can contribute to the health of the tree. Some ash trees are more tolerant than others. So all trees will have, not just ash trees, will have light dieback at some point. It's difficult really to do anything much about it until the dieback becomes really obvious, actually. Because this specimen may be fairly tolerant to what it's facing. We will monitor the future of the tree. We would expect anybody noticing significant decline to report that to us, but we will keep an eye on it as well. And management would involve pruning, so we would expect the removal of any dead wood. It may be necessary to reduce the crown. It may be necessary to remove specific limbs to address any safety elements, but ultimately this tree should be retained as long as possible. It's not, we really don't know how quick and to what extent the impact of this is going to be. The Forestry Commission, we will report it to them. They monitor all of these. They are trying to do a very broad study in trees that show greater tolerance and how they may be used to create future trees that will be more resistant to this disease. But it is a threat. But at this moment in time, we really don't know. In terms of other things that can be done, it's little things like clearing mud and leaves off nearby car tires, that type of thing. It's just careful management, but it remains to be seen what will happen with this. So that's about the health of the tree. How is it caused? How does it spread? It's essentially through the spores of a fungus being blown around by the wind, particularly within a 10-mile radius. And but it is very common. It is very common in the UK, I'm afraid. So yeah, it's a threat to the species.
Thank you, John. Any further questions before we go comments? Cool. Any comments, Ed?
Sorry, just going back to, we want this tree to be protected. Obviously, the land potential to develop that plot is a house would be sold for a significant amount in the millions there, which is going to, well, make a tree seem unimportant to perhaps to some people. So I mean, when we protect it, I mean, a fine, if it's £1,000, it's a lot of money to take out of your wallet. But if you're selling a house for a couple of million or a plot with planning permission, it gets lost, doesn't it? I'm just, yeah, I thought I ought to just bring that up. I mean, do we as a council, without going off, are we prosecuting people if that were to happen?
Sorry, Chairman, I hadn't quite taken the point there. Yes, by any unauthorised works to a tree with a TPO, we would seek prosecution. We would take it to the court, and we would seek the maximum penalty.
Thank you. Good message and strong message to end on then. Okay, so proceeding to a vote. All those voting against?
None, Chairman.
Not voting?
None, Chairman.
Voting in favour?
8, 9, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, excellent. So on to our next item of business. So we've got an item of planning enforcement appeals. John, do you want to update us on that? I think there was one item relating to an appeal for a loft conversion. Tim, you go for it.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, the one appeal decision dismissed. So obviously, the inspector agreed with us as a council. It's such a resubmission of a previous refusal, which was for a rather awkward roof extension on a single-storey rear section of the building. The building was locally listed, and simply didn't like the design and scale of it when the inspector agreed.
Fantastic. Any questions or comments at all on that particular issues? Good. I think it's just helpful to obviously reflect what the when appeals are made and what the outcome are, so we can enforce our learning as we need to. Clearly, this was really a good call on all sides. Super. Next item of business then we're on to. I think we've got Raymond on the line, and he's going to give a planning enforcement service presentation. And I think we also want to send congratulations because you've just become a father. So congratulations from the committee. Appreciate if you need to head off in an emergency. Haven't been there many times. Do you want to lead us off with this item?
Hello, could you all hear me and see me? Yes,
can hear you.
Yes, I can see myself. Hello, thanks, Chair, for the well wishes and congratulations, and hello to everyone at the members of the committee. And it's good to put my face to a name on an email. So I'm quickly going to go through share my screen and look at the planning enforcement overview of this year so far. Just running by some stats of this year. Firstly, we're 4 planning enforcement officers investigating breaches of planning control. We typically have between 300 and 450 cases per year. That's averaging over across last 5 years. We receive approximately 1,000 emails per year, and a lot of it is responded to and acknowledged within 1 to 5 working days. And that's we're trying to prioritize trying to get back to customers and members as soon as possible on all of them. We had about 870 backlog cases in February 2022 when I first joined, and through some sort of exercises such as one-to-ones, group triages, and going through hundreds and hundreds of enforcement cases one by one, weeding them out, what's planning related, what's duplicates. We got it down to 330 backlog cases by this month. So it's a reduction of 2/3. We served 14 enforcement notices this calendar year, which is the most amount of notices over the last 12 years. And the majority of the reported breaches that we get is generally related to residential extension and alterations, outbuildings, residential related. A lot of the notices are also on the back of a retrospective planning application refusal and dismissed appeal. I won't read every single letter or word of this slide, but this is sort of the processes of the planning enforcement. So when we get an enforcement complaint in, it's treated as confidential, and we try to get back to every inquiry within 3 working days, and 3 to 5 working days. And we would prioritize a case, A, B, and C. So depending on whether it's A, B, and C, it would take between 3 or 10 or 20 days to acknowledge the complaint and do a site visit. And after the site visit is done, the case officer would generally pursue the owner or get back to the complainant and take investigation measures to see whether it's expedient to take formal enforcement action or to remedy it by informal investigations and have a discussion with the alleged offender. So I spoke about the priorities between 3, 10, and 20 working days of receiving the complaint to doing a site visit. So priority A, we have to do a site visit within 3 working days. That's our sort of what we're working towards to. These are involving listed buildings, tree preservation order, and demolition in the conservation area. Most cases are within priority B, your bread and butter residential alteration, extensions, outbuildings. Breaches conditions such as social working hours, breaches of construction management plans, and unauthorized change of uses, material change of uses. And we get the least amount of priority C, this and priority A. We get, these are sort of display of adverts, installation of telecoms equipment, so sort of your commercial sort of works that are least priority, mainly because they're in commercial areas on the high street and generally away from making harm to the residential amenity. So there's several types of tools available to enforcement. So it's just not enforcement notice only. It's also section 215 notice. So it's an untidy land, such as a neglected private land, such as a back garden, overgrown trees and weeds, vegetation in a front garden. We could serve a breach of condition notice, where the breach of a condition of planning permission, we serve a notice and they don't have the right to appeal against that. We also got stop notices where harm is demonstrated and it has to be stopped. We've got temporary stop notices where the harm is there, but it's not expedient enough to have a permanent stop to it, but that temporary stop would get the developer to submit a planning application or discharge condition application or to remedy the harm. Discontinuance notice, that's generally involved with adverts. Injunctions are sort of going to the court, magistrate's court, to get an immediate stop to very harmful works. We could prosecute, for example, if enforcement notice are not adhered to within the given time frame and they lost their appeal, we could go for the prosecution for non-compliance of a notice to the magistrate's court, and that could result in fines and proceeds of crime, monies that's owed back to the council from money earned from criminal activity, the criminal activity being a non-compliance of an enforcement notice. We also got planning contravention notice, that's what we serve to get information out of relevant parties that we need information from within 21 days. That's also, we can prosecute on non sort of return of planning contravention notices. So that could request information such as documents and information about the use of unauthorized use, for example, and get details of who's living in an unauthorized HMO or flat. It includes tenancy agreements if we ask that. So it's a bit like a questionnaire we cater to get the information out of people if they're not forthcoming in our earlier sort of discussions. So, so we try to remedy harm informally, which is quickest and most cost effective, and rather than serving a notice. Serving a notice can result in appeals. 95% of our notices would end up in appeal, and it takes months for the planning inspectorates to make a decision on it because they're prioritizing sort of major schemes and they have a backlog since COVID. So we're trying to negotiate things informally. So that means, for example, going straight to the developer or the alleged offender homeowner and negotiate what could be done to reduce the harm, to mitigate harm to neighbors, for example. Or we get them to submit a retrospective planning application if we think it may get approved. I spoke about the negotiation, so it could be a building's built too large and it's blocking light. We generally trying to get them to make it smaller, and a lot of the time they do agree to do it, but may not be within an immediate time frame. We also liaise with other departments. For example, we get a lot of complaints are not directly, not just planning related, but also, for example, materials on a highway. Some of it may be planning related if it's contrary to a construction management planning condition, but also if it's in the public realm, the highways department can deal with offending items on the highway, or could deal with licensing if it's to do with a unauthorized change of use to commercial premises, and also building control could help out if a structure is deemed to be unsafe, for example. Just an example of what we've done when we served a Section 215 notice, which is the untidy land notice. This is Tamworth Lane, 42 Tamworth Lane. Some of you may have known this because it's been quite ongoing. So we served 215 notice, which it has been neglected because the walls have been demolished or sort of just fell down and overgrown. And served the notice did help clear up the land to some extent, not fully perfect, but it has tidied it up, as you could see. This is an ongoing case, which is going towards the court, I believe, at some point to get it boarded up. And they do ask for evidence. The court do ask for evidence of us serving a 215 notice, which did help us. Well, I think it is going to be boarded up. Don't quote me on that. Another case is on Dunsford Road, High Street, where we successfully negotiated informally to get down a wicker fence down to make it more aesthetically pleasing again on the high street. This was done informally, so we didn't have to serve a notice for them to appeal against it, and it would take months to get that finally removed. Just moving forwards for next year and towards the back end of Christmas, we continue to get the backlog cases down. We continue to serve enforcement notice where needed, and if we cannot informally negotiate a remedy to the harm. We're trying to go for more successful prosecutions and direct action as a result of the successful prosecution. Direct action is where if they did still have not complied with enforcement notice, and after the notice, appeal and court order, we could get contractors to do the works to comply with the notice, and the charge will be back on the owner on the land. We're going to continue to get back to all inquiries, hopefully within 5 working days. We are restructuring the team to try to make all interim staff to become permanent members. So this would be a cost saving. And we already had some interest from interim staff to go permanent because they enjoy the work and enjoy the work at Merton. We have placed 1 officer on a part-time course, 1 day a week release to become chartered town planner. So it's good for retention of staff and boost morale and career building in training. We're going to adopt a planning enforcement policy, which we hope to be made public on the website and be put on hopefully by beginning the first quarter next year. And also we had the news of the new Article 4 direction of preventive development rights to turn dwelling houses into HMOs in certain wards. It's be interesting to see, what cases we get in terms of complaints, and also whether we should be advising on putting in a retrospective planning application, or shall we serve notices straight away. And it's also, it'd be interesting if we did ask for a retrospective planning application on a HMO, small HMO, whether we would approve it or refuse it. And we would, if we refuse it, it'd be good to check, to test it at appeal to see what the planning inspector says, and that would affect how we determine planning applications and expediency on serving notices in the future, in the near future. So that's a quick 10 slide overview from me, and these are the contact details if someone wants to make a complaint, enforcement complaint. Here's the team inbox and my email. We have a new planning duty phone number. Customers, constituents could report, and members could report planning enforcement related issues on our website. And that is the end of the overview. Are there any questions from anyone?
Raymond, a flurry of hands have quickly gone up. So I take that as a positive. I just want to thank you very much. You can just stop sharing your slides so we can see. It'd be great. But I just want to say thank you very much for doing that. So I'll turn over to the committee. So questions. I saw Jill's hand go up first, then Dan, then Martin. Jill.
Congratulations, Raymond.
Thank you. Thank you much.
And I also want to place on record my thanks to you, because you are an extremely responsive officer, and my experience of working with you is 100% positive. So I'm grateful to you and your team. And it's helpful to understand the process, particularly us new councillors, first time on the block, where something is to be identified as a potential enforcement matter. We don't necessarily know that. And so I think any guidance that your team can offer in the future to people that are not necessarily on the planning committee, to understand that we can reach out to you if we see something, because we do get a lot of questions. So I think a broad spectrum of dissemination of this information, possibly the PowerPoint, to all councillors would be very helpful. But I in particular note that you respond very quickly to items that occur in the conservation area, which is very pleasing to know. And I think I just want to say, as a councillor in a conservation area, this is very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So over to Raymond, over to Dan, and then Martin, and take him as 3. Dan.
Hi, Raymond. Congratulations on becoming a father.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask about inspections of breaches of planning. I understand that as part of planning permission, you can include conditions for example, restricting a business's hours of operations. So I wanted to ask, in terms of site inspections, let's say I have a constituent who comes to me saying, look, this business is operating at night, heavy machinery, it should not be doing this. Your officers go and inspect, and just so happens that evening they are not working. How is that taken into account? Do you accept evidence from constituents, photographs, videos, etc., or must your officers see a breach in order for legal action to commence?
Cool. And final question from Martin.
Yeah, just got a few questions. Obviously, in terms of section 215 notices, yeah, it's a huge frustration. We see it throughout the wards. Many of these unkept front gardens. It's obviously the threshold there is for intervention in terms of that, and obviously how that is actually determined as a whole. It would also be good as well to see obviously some kind of breakdown in terms of section 215 notices, where they've been issued in the borough, but also as well some of the detailed stats in terms of, you know, prosecutions, enforcement notices, and all the other ones outlined. And the other thing I'd obviously like to add is in terms of staffing. We know staffing is an incredibly big challenge in this area. There is a shortage of suitably qualified people out there, but also as well, we know the turnover is very high. And obviously in terms of the planning department, it's been a continually challenge for many years in terms of the number of interim staff that are employed, because we just can't recruit people. And part of that is obviously in relation, I think, sometimes to the salaries which are offered compared to the private sector. So obviously I'd be interested in your comments in terms of that, because obviously without the staff, it makes our job a whole lot more difficult in terms of carrying out the necessary enforcement actions.
Thank you, Martin. So just to summarize for you, Raymond, I think in reverse order, I think we'll take some of the points about Martin excellently raised about data away and work on that. I would be very interested in seeing that as well. But Martin has a very good point. It'd be great to speak on about staff and retention, all that you touched on in your presentation, but if you can elaborate a bit further. Dan's point about kind of, I was going to ask the same question, the evidentiary test and the type of submissions, and do you accept videos and pictures, and how does this actually work on a practical level? And Jill's point about you know, A, generally your helpfulness, but B, of course, the spread of your details and information to make your, well, to make you busy, appreciate that, but at the same time spread the good work that you guys are doing.
Yes, just to answer, going back to Martin's questions. Yeah, there is we do have what I call planning enforcement register. So basically, we have a duty to put all our enforcement notices online. So it is all publicly displayed. I could send you the link. So it shows every single formal enforcement action we've done over the last, I believe it's around 10 years, maybe more than that. So you can see that every single sort of prosecution, enforcement notices we served. In terms of stats, if you want a big breakdown of all of it, I can, if you just email myself, I could try to get that for you, me or John, we could try to get that information to you. In terms of, yeah, there is a shortage of staff leading to interim members of staff. And I think it's a bigger sort of issue that it's above my pay grade, but I think it's also where the borough is placed, and also the budget for paying the salaries. But as I mentioned before, providing training and offering a good place to work does keep members of staff staying here. And like as I mentioned before, one of the two interim planning enforcement officers in my team decided to go permanent intimate very quickly, and also the other ones considering it because the Merton has the apprenticeship pot where it could pay for courses. Yes, in terms of your second question, we do, like as I mentioned before, we do serve planning conservation notices where they have to legally answer the question within 21 days, otherwise we can prosecute. Failing that, we do accept evidence from our site visit and also members, the complainants as well. We try to keep it. It's a bit tricky because, say, for example, if you've done a video recording from someone's house's window, it can sort of implicate who the complainant is. But we can record it as a video anonymously. So the more evidence, the better. And also we do, like I mentioned before, we do liaise with other team members in the council. So, for example, you mentioned about the out of hours noises from a business, for example, keeping people up. We do discuss with the environmental health noise officers who do the nighttime shift, and they can report back to us, and their evidence is good enough because that is council's evidence. They do have noise readers. A lot of it is not statutory noise nuisance for environmental health to take formal action on, but their evidence is good enough for us to make something perhaps more expedient for us to serve a breach condition notice, for example. On to the first question about the what is planning enforcement related, what is not. As I mentioned, is you just drop me a line and I can answer your questions. I'll respond back within 3 to 5 working days, hopefully if not the first 2 days. We're gonna, like I mentioned before, we're gonna put out a planning enforcement policy which sort of breaks down what is planning enforcement related and what is sort of kind of on the borderline, which involves untidy site, which, for example, a skip for construction with planning permission is not a section 215 notice because things such as noise and skips and messy works are naturally a product of construction. And if the construction with planning permission doesn't have restricted conditions, we cannot take planning enforcement action, but we can report things like unsafe buildings to building control. You could report noise, social hour noise to environmental health. And yeah, like I mentioned before, if there's any doubt of whether something's planning related or not, please drop me a line or report it through our website, call the planning duty line, and we respond to it in a case-by-case basis.
Amazing. Thank you, Raymond. I mean, we could generally probably ask you questions all night, but we've got other items. And what I'm going to do is just pass this over to John, who's just going to close down, and then we'll move on to the private item of business, the training. So John, if you close us out.
Yes, thanks, Chairman, and thank you, Raymond. That was really comprehensive and really helpful. If I could just add a couple of points specifically in respect of the questions that were asked. I think thank you to Councillor Manley for the kind words about the service, and I think there's more we can do about that with the communications team, and that is the next piece of work, to get our results out there through different media channels to demonstrate the improvements that we've made. So that's something I intend to take up with Matt Burrows. It's something that I know other councils have started to do and we should be doing as well. In terms of evidence, a question from Councillor Johnston, what I would caution against is residents filming. They've got to think about their own interests and sort of video evidence and that kind of thing, but there can also be data protection implications coming out of that. There's two important things I think residents can do for things like noise coming out of businesses. One is to keep a written log and keep that information coming into my enforcement team and also environmental health. We will accept that as evidence. But what will really help their cause is if they could demonstrate the harm that is being caused by that noise. If they're woken up at 1 o'clock in the morning, that is harm. But they need to tell us that, not just that there's noise coming out of this site all night. You know, I specifically woke up at a specific time. That's affected my life, my sleep pattern, going to work the following day. All that provides a real body of evidence that we can ultimately take in prosecution, court proceedings, however we progress it. So it's not just recording the noise, it's demonstrating what the impact of that is. And if the residents can do that, we can work with that. And once we start getting enough recorded cases of that, then we can do out of hours inspections and you know, there are other sources of enforcement help that we can bring in, like we do when we take direct action. So we can resource that. In terms of the staff, if I could just mention that briefly, we've got a new planning enforcement structure that's drafted. We've got as Raymond said, we've got the new local enforcement plan that's associated with that, so we know what the expectations of the officers are. The structure, as we see it, as being fit for purpose, has come in over budget, but by making agency staff permanent, we will be in a better place than we are now, and that's something that we want to present to members. We've got a report ready to go. We have right across the board, we know that staff retention has been a problem over the last few years. Just to give you an example, between February 2020 and sort of halfway through this year, we lost 16 full-time planners. And we've had to do something about it. So we've asked all the agency staff who want to become permanent to express their interest and to tell us what their expectations are. And we're just considering that at the moment. I need to go back to the finance team on the back of that to work that through. We are offering education opportunities, like Raymond has said. We're very interested in graduates and apprentices at the moment, and we're having conversations about that. And we just want to create a very settled team. That's the only way of making it successful. Some of these things are slightly on hold because it's not clear exactly how the enforcement service will work when the new executive directors come in and have their new portfolios, because it could actually cross over a couple of them. And if I could just make a plea, members, my preference would be, I strongly believe that planning enforcement should be linked to planning, but I might not have the final say on that.
Well, you've all been lobbied and heard. Yeah. Cool. Well, I just want to thank John for the remarks, and also Raymond again for giving up his time this evening to feedback. And I echo the comments we've had about how do we circulate this further and get further colleagues involved. So just want to close our formal part of the meeting down and thank everyone for attending. And